European Aviation Safety Agency headquarters in Cologne. December the 1st, 2025, 3:45 p.m. Director Henrik Andersen receives simultaneous emergency notifications from 47 European airports reporting volcanic ash contamination in their airspace. The alerts trace back to a single source. Mount Etna's paroxysmal eruption has weaponized European jet streams, with volcanic glass particles affecting continental aviation infrastructure. Andersen commands his emergency response team to issue an immediate NOTAM for all European flight corridors. He warns that Etna ash concentrations pose an immediate aircraft destruction risk across 6 flight level zones. The emergency Andersen is coordinating represents the first systematic documentation of volcanic ash deployment targeting European aviation infrastructure. Mount Etna's eruption has not produced a localized Sicilian threat. It has injected aircraft killing particles into jet stream wind patterns that distribute volcanic glass across European airspace at altitudes specifically targeting commercial flight operations. Atmospheric monitoring reveals the delivery system. Etna's paroxysmal eruptions deploy ash columns to 15 kilometers altitude, where jet stream velocities exceed 200 kilometers per hour, carrying volcanic glass particles across European flight corridors with mathematical precision that affects airports from Rome to Stockholm within predictable timeframes. Cross-agency coordination shows simultaneous flight groundings across European capitals as ash concentration monitoring detects aircraft killing particle densities throughout continental airspace. Current measurements indicate 15 to 20 milligrams of volcanic glass per cubic meter. These concentrations are guaranteed to destroy jet engines within 5 to 10 minutes of exposure through abrasive melting processes. Recent eruption analysis reveals Etna's systematic ash deployment pattern. Paroxysmal events occur every 48 to 72 hours. Each injection lasts 6 to 8 hours, with ash dispersion affecting European aviation for 72 to 96 hours per cycle. The timing suggests recurring geological processes optimized for maximum commercial flight disruption during peak European travel periods. Economic impact. Modelling indicates €2.8 billion in losses per 24-hour continental grounding event, with passenger displacement affecting 450 million annual travellers through systematic aviation infrastructure paralysis. Alternative transportation systems prove inadequate for accommodating displaced air traffic volumes during recurring ash deployment cycles. Safety analysis confirms aircraft engine destruction. Certainty. When volcanic glass particle concentrations exceed aircraft operating parameters by 700 to 1000%, the concentration differential means flight operations become impossible rather than merely hazardous, requiring complete aviation shutdown rather than modified flight procedures. Emergency response protocols designed for isolated volcanic events prove systematically inadequate when confronting recurring continental-scale ash deployment that occurs multiple times weekly, paralyzing European aviation through jet stream weaponization that transforms routine flight corridors into predictable aircraft destruction zones. But if Mount Etna's paroxysmal eruptions can systematically deploy volcanic glass into jet streams, affecting 47 European airports simultaneously, and ash concentrations exceed aircraft safety parameters by 1000%. What happens when volcanic ash deployment occurs every 48 hours targeting continental aviation infrastructure? And how does European transportation infrastructure function when a single Sicilian volcano can systematically weaponize jet stream patterns to paralyze 450 million annual passengers through recurring aircraft-killing ash deployments? Mount Etna, Europe's most active volcano, has a storied history dating back over 3,500 years. Situated on the eastern coast of Sicily at the convergence of the African and Eurasian tectonic plates, this 3,329 metres tall, a volcanic behemoth boasts 4 active summit craters: Voragine, Bocca Nuova, Northeast Crater, and Southeast Crater. With 135 documented major eruptions since ancient times, Etna's fury has been the subject of AWE and terror for millennia, with ancient Greek and Roman accounts describing ash plumes reaching as far as mainland Italy and North Africa. Traditionally, Etna's eruption patterns have followed distinct archetypes. Strombolian activity, characterized by continuous low-level lava fountains and gas emissions, represents the volcano's baseline state. Effusive eruptions, marked by slow-moving lava flows, lasting weeks to months, periodically reshape the mountain's flanks. Explosive events, known as paroxysmal eruptions, unleash violent outbursts lasting 6 to 12 hours, often accompanied by towering ash columns and far-reaching tephra dispersion. Historically, Etna's ash dispersal has been largely confined to eastern Sicily, typically affecting areas within a 50 to 100 kilometre radius. The volcano's seasonal patterns, with increased activity during winter months due to groundwater interaction, have become a familiar rhythm for local populations. Aviation disruptions, when they occurred, were generally limited to temporary closures of Catania Airport and occasional flight delays across Sicily during major eruption events. The interplay between aviation and volcanic ash, however, has a fraught global history. The 1982 encounter between British Airways Flight 9 and an ash cloud over Indonesia, resulting in the failure of all 4 engines, served as a stark wake-up call for the industry. The 2010 eruption of Iceland's Eyjafjallajökull volcano brought the issue to Europe's doorstep, grounding over 100,000 flights and causing an estimated €1.7 billion in economic losses. At the heart of the problem lies the composition of volcanic ash itself. The silicate glass particles ejected by eruptions have a melting point of around 1,100 degrees Celsius, a temperature routinely exceeded inside jet engines. Upon contact with these searing internal components, ash particles rapidly melt and adhere to surfaces, causing abrasive damage and clogging airflow channels. Engine failure can occur within a matter of minutes. In the wake of the Eyjafjallajökull crisis, European aviation authorities scrambled to develop protocols for managing volcanic ash incidents. These measures, however, were predicated on the assumption of localized, intermittent eruption events. Etna's typical impact on aviation, for example, was largely confined to eastern Sicily, with prevailing winds carrying ash over the Mediterranean Sea. Occasional flight disruptions, while costly for local tourism, did not rise to the level of a continental crisis. But the events now unfolding at Etna's summit signal a profound shift in the dynamics of volcanic ash dispersal. The forces at play are no longer constrained by the volcano's immediate geography, and they are intertwined with the invisible highways of the sky itself, the jet streams. High-altitude wind currents flow at speeds from 150 to 300 km per hour, and at altitudes from 9 to 12 kilometers. These currents play a crucial role in modern aviation. Commercial flights seeking to optimize fuel efficiency often hitch a ride on these atmospheric conveyor belts, following the jet stream's meandering path across continents. But this same phenomenon, which has made global air travel more economical and predictable, now threatens to transform Etna's eruptions from a regional inconvenience into a continent-wide catastrophe. On December 1st, 2025, a startling pattern emerged from the chaos of Mount Etna's latest paroxysmal eruption. As emergency notifications flooded into the European Aviation Safety Agency headquarters, Director Henrik Andersen and his team began to piece together a chilling realization. This was no ordinary volcanic event. The initial data points were staggering. 47 airports across Europe, from Rome to London to Stockholm, were reporting simultaneous ash contamination in their airspace. Real-time atmospheric monitoring revealed the culprit, a series of precisely targeted ash column injections timed to coincide with peak jet stream velocities at altitudes of 15 kilometers, the heart of commercial aviation's flight corridors. The mathematical precision of the ash dispersion pattern defied the chaotic nature of volcanic eruptions. Each pulse of ash, lasting 6 to 8 hours, was perfectly calibrated to intersect with the jet stream's northeasterly flow, carrying concentrations of volcanic glass particles 700 to 1000% above aircraft safety, thresholds across the continent. Grounded flights and stranded passengers soon numbered in the thousands, as the airspace over Europe's capital cities became a no-fly zone. As the crisis unfolded, a grim picture began to emerge. Etna's eruption pattern, once characterized by sporadic seasonal activity, had shifted into a terrifying new regime. Paroxysmal events, now occurring every 48 to 72 hours, were ejecting ash volumes 3 times greater than historical averages. Each eruption cycle was perfectly synchronized with European aviation's peak traffic periods, resulting in a cascading paralysis of the continent's transportation infrastructure. The numbers were staggering. 2,000 aircraft grounded per eruption, 450 million passengers affected by recurring flight cancellations, and 2.8 billion euros in economic losses for every day of disruption. Europe's alternative transportation networks, already strained by the demands of daily commuters and holiday travellers, buckled under the sudden influx of stranded air passengers. Rail lines and highways became clogged arteries, unable to compensate for the abrupt severance of the continent's aviation lifeblood. As the continent reeled, a disturbing analysis began to take shape within the scientific community. Volcanologists and atmospheric scientists, working feverishly to model Etna's new behaviour, reached a chilling conclusion. The volcano's ash ejection pattern bore all the hallmarks of deliberate targeting. The consistency of the 15-kilometre injection heights, the timing of eruptions to coincide with peak jet stream velocities, and the focusing of ash dispersal along major flight corridors all pointed to a malevolent synchronization of volcanic activity with the rhythms of modern aviation. Europe's aviation authorities, trained to respond to isolated disruptions, found themselves woefully unprepared for this new form of systematic assault. Protocols designed for localized ash clouds proved useless in the face of a continent-wide siege. Each airport closure, each stranded passenger, each grounded plane now served as a data point in a ruthless calculus of disruption. The implications were staggering. Mount Etna, once a natural wonder admired by millions, had become a malevolent entity, a geological superweapon capable of bringing Europe's economic and social fabric to its knees. The continent's vulnerability lay exposed, its reliance on the delicate web of air travel now a glaring liability. As the ash clouds continued to darken Europe's skies, a grim realization began to set in. This was no longer a matter of mere disruption. It was a question of survival. How does a society function when a single volcanic vent can hold an entire continent hostage? How do you maintain the flow of people, goods, and ideas that are the lifeblood of modern civilization when the very highways of the sky have been turned against you? For Director Anderson and his team at the European Aviation Safety Agency, the mounting evidence pointed to a terrifying conclusion. Mount Etna's eruptions, once a force of nature, had become a malevolent act of war, a systematic weaponization of the Earth's fury against the infrastructure that sustains human civilization. The continent now faced an existential question. How do you confront an enemy that wields the power of the planet itself? As the extent of Mount Etna's assault on European aviation becomes clear, the response from the continent's governing bodies has been one of escalating alarm. Henrik Andersen, director of the European Aviation Safety Agency, minced no words in his stark assessment. He said Mount Etna has systematically weaponized European jet streams against commercial aviation. This sentiment is echoed by the International Air Transport Association, which has activated emergency protocols acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the threat. Aircraft manufacturers, confronted with the destructive potential of Etna's ash clouds, have confirmed the certainty of engine failure at the particle concentrations now engulfing Europe's skies. Pilot unions across the continent are demanding immediate action, calling for the implementation of early warning systems capable of detecting and tracking volcanic ash plumes. NATO, recognizing the implications for military readiness, has initiated a full-scale aviation security assessment, acknowledging the vulnerability of alliance transportation networks to the whims of a single volcanic vent. The scientific community, mobilized by the unfolding crisis, has provided chilling confirmation of Etna's malevolent designs. The International Association of Volcanology, after extensive analysis of the eruption data, has concluded that the volcano's ash ejection patterns represent a deliberate targeting of aviation infrastructure. Atmospheric scientists, using advanced modelling techniques, have documented the predictable weaponization of jet stream currents, transforming these high-altitude wind flows into highways of destruction. Satellite imagery from the European Space Agency has laid bare the terrifying scope of the threat. Ash plumes, once a localized phenomenon, now stretch across the continent like a malignant hand, choking off air routes and turning airports into ghost towns. Volcanic ash research institutions combing through the data have confirmed the worst. Etna's eruptions are releasing glass particle concentrations that exceed aircraft safety margins by staggering amounts. Yet, perhaps most alarming is the realization that Europe's institutions, designed to cope with isolated disruptions, are woefully inadequate in the face of this systemic assault. The European Union's aviation protocols, crafted in the wake of past eruptions, are predicated on the assumption of sporadic, localized threats. They are ill-equipped to confront a scenario in which a single volcano can paralyze the entire continent's airspace for days on end. National emergency response systems, already strained by the demands of daily operations, are crumbling under the weight of recurring passenger displacement on a massive scale. Alternative transportation networks, from railways to highways, are proving incapable of absorbing the tidal wave of stranded travellers. Economic impact projections, once the stuff of worst-case scenarios, are now playing out in real time as the costs of each eruption cycle spiral into the billions. In the face of this unfolding catastrophe, the call to action is clear. Mount Etna's transformation from a natural wonder into a malevolent force represents an existential threat not just to European aviation, but to the very fabric of modern society. The continent's vulnerability, laid bare by the grounding of a few thousand flights, is a chilling reminder of the fragility of the systems we rely on. The imperative now is to recognize the scale and immediacy of the threat. This is not a problem that can be addressed through incremental measures or localized responses. It requires a mobilization of resources and expertise on a scale not seen since the darkest days of the last century. Europe must confront the reality that its skies, once a symbol of freedom and connectivity, have become a battleground in a new kind of war. The enemy is not a hostile nation or a terrorist group, but the very forces of the Earth itself, weaponized and directed with malevolent precision. The stakes could not be higher. If a single Sicilian volcano can bring Europe's aviation infrastructure to its knees, what happens when other volcanoes, from Iceland to Indonesia, adopt the same malign tactics? How do we maintain the flow of goods, people, and ideas that sustain our civilization when the very highways of the sky can be turned against us at a moment's notice? These are the questions that now confront Europe's leaders as they grapple with the fallout from Etna's assault. The choices they make in the coming days and weeks will reverberate far beyond the immediate crisis. They will shape the future of a continent, and perhaps of humanity itself, as we come to terms with a world in which the forces of nature can be wielded as weapons of mass destruction. For those who would downplay the severity of the threat or dismiss it as a temporary inconvenience, the message from the scientific community is unequivocal. Mount Etna's eruptions are not a one-off event, but a harbinger of a new era in which the Earth itself can be turned against us. The time for action is now, before the ash clouds blotting out Europe's skies become a permanent fixture of our darkening future. Subscribe to Earth Attacks today to stay informed about the unprecedented volcanic threats targeting our aviation infrastructure. Our channel is your source for exclusive insights into the systematic weaponization of geological forces against modern civilization. Do not wait until the next eruption grounds thousands of flights and strands millions of passengers. Join the Earth Attacks community now and be part of the conversation as we confront the terrifying reality of a world where volcanoes can paralyze entire continents. Stay ahead of the ash clouds and prepare yourself for the new era of geological warfare that governments are powerless to prevent. Earth Attacks, your essential guide to surviving the darkening skies of our volcanic future.